Hello everyone, welcome to a brand new podcast, a knitting and sometimes crochet question and answer show with me, Stuart from the Wool Patch, and yes, look who's here, Jimmy. Hey Jimmy.
Hey Stuart.
It's Jimmy from Jimmy Does Knitting, is that right, on YouTube? Yeah, and where else can they find you?
Instagram and YouTube as Jimmy Does Knitting, and Revelry, of course.
Brilliant. Yes. So the idea behind this podcast was I like listening to knitting shows in the car on my way to work. I have a 45-minute journey. But trying to find new knitting shows is quite difficult. And I like the question and answer format, but sometimes some of the question and answer formats I listen to, there's too much talk of other things. So I thought, well, do you know what? If we just want a question and answer show, then why not make one ourselves? And who better to do it with me than Jimmy, who is a knitwear designer and knitter. How long have you been designing for, Jimmy?
Like a year, maybe, maybe two.
No way.
Not that long. I'm not that long of a knitter or a designer. Sorry.
Wow. Well, there they are. We're going to cover all points, hopefully, as a knitter and a knitwear designer, Jimmy, maybe as a new knitter too, and me with my shop with now I've knocked up 9 years of working in a yarn shop after leaving teaching. So I think we've got all bases covered to do a question and answer podcast. And as I said, all I want to talk about is question and answers. So Jimmy, we're just going to go straight in with it, all right?
Great, let's do it.
First question that we got from Val, they say, which comes first for you, the yarn or the pattern? Go on, Jimmy. What comes first for you?
It has to be the pattern. It's always the pattern. And I thought about this a little bit because I also think that I'm very much a product knitter. I'm somewhat a process knitter, but I'm also a product knitter. So it's the final piece that I'm usually after rather than playing around with a particular sort of yarn or something like that. So usually it's the pattern, and then I go through my Rolodex of yarn and see what I can get my hands on and make it with. And what about you?
Yeah, I think I'd like to say the same, but I think I'm half and half. It could be whatever. So sometimes what happens, I'm on Instagram and something will come up, a pattern will come up and I go, oh my God, I love it. And then I want to knit it like you were saying because of that end product. Or I'll be in my shop and a rep will come in and show me a new yarn and I'm gonna go, oh my Lord, I love that. I have no clue of what to knit with it, but I know I want to knit it. So then the hunt for an appropriate pattern for that yarn is on, because sometimes I know you get yarns given, patterns given for yarns, but sometimes they're all a bit commercial or a bit too niche, and I'm like, oh, it's nothing for me, especially as a bloke too. So you then have that long hunt. So there's you hunting through your yarn stash for the right yarn for the pattern that you like, and there's me sometimes looking for the pattern. But I'll pick and choose. But I like what you said about the idea of process or product. I don't think I'm a process knitter. I know I can understand that idea. Some people want to knit and enjoy that experience, but I think, I like the end product is what keeps you going, don't you think?
I think for me, yeah, for sure. I mean, the process a little bit. I mean, sometimes if you're learning a new skill or if there's a particular technique that you're craving, but still ultimately for me, it's usually the product.
Yeah. So in your Ravelry, do you have a big queue? Do you use that feature, the queue where you put a pattern into the queue as to what to knit next?
I do not. I have a notes app on my phone with knit project ideas, and at the bottom of that I have what I'm knitting on, and then below that I have like sort of what's kind of in my queue, because for some reason all of what I'm knitting on at once just like flies off the needles, and then I need to kind of know what's coming up. So I need to know what I can plan for or what I have yarn for, and then I can move it there. So that's my system. I don't really use Ravelry a whole lot anymore, actually, if I'm going to be honest. No, what about you?
I love it. I love the program for just pattern searching and looking through. I love using it's a bit 1999 website, isn't it? It hasn't.
Yeah.
It doesn't seem to have updated for the 20s that we're in now. So it's getting used to that. But on that left-hand side, that old classic, when you're looking on a desktop, it's completely different on the mobile. But looking at that left-hand side, that refine feature, I use that all the time. I'm like, yeah, just show me 4-ply and just show me seam top down patterns, or show me knitted flat patterns, and I love that feature. And then having a look. And then, therefore, I've got a lot of patterns that I favourite, and then I put in my queue. Whether I do it next is another thing. Now, just thinking of you as a designer, is it a bit like a chef? You know, if you've been cooking all day and you get home and you don't want to cook, is that the same with knitting? If you're knitting pretty much a lot of the time and designing, do you then knit for you in the evening, or do you just get like, I can't be doing with this now, I've been designing all day, I don't want to do any more knitting?
I guess I always knit for myself in one way or another. I have projects I need to think about, and then I have projects I don't need to think about. And I think that's kind of important. But I mean, I don't get tired of it. I need to, I think, have my hands busy. Yeah. So in that aspect, I think it's all right. But there's like work knitting, and then there's other sort of knitting.
Okay. That is so true. You've just said what all my ladies say at the shop. So at my shop, I have these social classes, knit and natter classes, and they're always saying they can't have idle hands. They have to be knitting whilst watching Netflix or whatever in the evening. I'm sort of getting into that. I sometimes I just want to watch Netflix and not, in your latest thing that you're binge watching, and then I'll go, oh God, I could have been knitting for the last hour, and then I'll get my knitting out. So I'm getting better, but yeah, I can imagine you've always got something on needles and watching and knitting at the same time.
Yeah, most of the time.
Brilliant. Well, there we are. Question 1 done. Let's go on to question 2, which is something that comes up in my shop quite a lot. This is from Reese in Scotland. Thank you, Reese. He says, do you have any yarn alternatives for the Menton 2? An all-over cabled sweater by Megan Babin. It uses, get my French here, or my Latin, De Rerum Natural Gilliat, a worsted yarn that is 250 metres to 100 grams. I could maybe get that, but looking to see what else you think might work for it. Go for it, Jimmy. What do you think?
Well, let's go to the sweater for those people who are listening. Megan Babin is a knitwear designer who I absolutely love. I've knit several of her patterns. The Savin and the Alwyn are similar to the mentioned 2. She does great cables, and she just has very well written patterns, and they fit incredibly. If you are a person that likes cables, go check her out. And if you're, I'd say, an adventurous knitwear designer for men, she has really good men's patterns, which is hard to find. So that's sort of the basics. Now, the mentioned 2 is an all-over cable raglan that's knit in pieces.
Okay.
And it would be a similar construction to the 2 that I've knit previously. So that is what that is. I have like long answers and short answers for this. The short answer is, get a yarn that you would like, that you can get gauge with. If you like the fabric, go for it. Try that.
Brilliant.
That is the easiest answer. But I think that Reese is probably looking for specifics. So I have a couple of answers, but Stuart, as a yarn store owner, what do you have, or what would be good that you've seen for a worsted weight cable?
Well, It's slightly muddied water here in the UK because we don't really use the term worsted for yarn. So pretty much all our yarns generically will go 4-ply, double knit, and Aran weight. So when you start to see more worsted, which I don't know what it's like in Europe, worsted weight. I know in America they use that term heavily, maybe more so than Aran. What's it like with you? Worsted weight yarn.
I use worsted all the time, but I'm a YouTube knitter learner.
Okay.
So there's that. I think in the US they use it's a 4. They have like little yarn balls.
They do,
and everything.
They have their own terminology and their own number guide system from their Arts Council. But for us, very rarely will we use the genre of worsted. So we just skip to Aran. So I would look at that and just give an Aran because it is classic Aran gauge. So when I was looking at the yarn, which I have stocked before, it is classic 4mm for the rib and 5mm for everything else. So I was looking at my Arans, and actually I managed to bring some home because I thought, we're going to talk about this question. And classic UK British company is the West Yorkshire Spinners, and their new one called Colour Lab Aran fits a treat. So that is a classic Aran weight. It's and a worsted weight, so it meets the gauge. It's classic 18 to 24, and I think the how do we say it? How do you say? Is it Latin? I think it's Latin, isn't it? De rerum natura.
De rerum natura.
Yeah. Their gauge that they gave is 17 to 19. 25 to 27. So you've got a bit of flexibility there, haven't you, actually, with gauge? And this is slap bang in the middle of that, which is 18 stitches to 24 rows. So that is perfect. 4mm for the rib, 5mm for everything else. And then I've got another Aran, a merino Aran. But this one, and I think you can, for those who are looking at home, you might be able to see the difference that the merino Aran is actually a thick Aran, and this one from the West Yorkshire Spinners, Colour Lab, is actually a thin Aran, and that's where you're almost into that worsted sort of positioning. So you remember, everyone, you've got double knit, and then the next one for us is Aran, and then in between the two is your worsted weight. So you could even find a thick double knit, Reese, that might work, because some companies' gauges are different. So you could find a thick double knit that will work for you, or a thin Aran, if your yarn doesn't say worsted. But I haven't got many yarns at the shop that will actually say worsted weight on the ball band. It all comes down to reading the ball band and knowing the gauge. Do you know, I think Cascade, there's a classic American one, Cascade 2020, 220. I think that's a classic. I would call it Aran, but I think in America it's worsted. So that's what I would say, Reese. Have a look for some classic Aran, British Aran weights. And there are loads of Aran brands or companies that have Aran weight. I'm not too familiar with any other brands that are worsted weight. Knitting for Olive, have they got one that's worsted weight? Not sure.
Knitting for Olive does have a worsted weight. I'm working with it right now. It's a nice yarn. I have not done cables with it, but I'm sure you could look up on Ravelry. This is a great resource. Look up on Ravelry projects with the yarn that are maybe cabled, and you can see whether or not you like the cables that gets it. Like De Rerum Natura, for example, has a little bit of a flatter cable, but they're well defined. So that is something. Cascade 220 I've also used with Megan's designs. It works well. She actually has her own yarn company, Hudson and West, which has very premium, beautiful American-made yarn. So if you're in America It's pricey, but I love it, and it makes beautiful cables. So that's a good one. And then in Europe, maybe Wool Dreamers might be a good one. I really like their ethics. I think they have some really good yarn for cables. I've also done that. And
oh wow,
I don't know.
Going. You're on a roll.
Explore. Yeah, no, I told you I have a yarn list. So
I love it.
I think just explore, look at the Ravelry project pages of that or similar sweaters, specifically like her sweaters, and see what other people liked or what you like that other people did. And that usually can help a lot.
So that basically the short answer was choose a yarn and see if you get gauge. That was the simple answer, wasn't it? The swatch.
And you like the fabric that it creates. Yeah.
And actually, that is a really important point, because that long answer is look at the fabric that it creates, because yarn substitution, we could probably do a whole half-hour show on this. I deal with that a lot in my shop. Customers will come in with a pattern and they'll want to double knit. More often that pattern was out of print 50 years ago. So we're then having to try and get ounces to grams and work out meterage so we can guess the right meterage. And with yarn substitution, you are sometimes doing more than just finding the meterage. So whatever the meterage of Gilead one is, or 100 grams, say it says 5 balls of 100 grams, is not necessarily going to be 5 balls of this West Yorkshire Spinners, because the meterage could be slightly different because of the fabric, the way it's spun. So you've got to look at that. And Jimmy, when you were saying how it knits up is crucial, because even when you yarn sub, and you think, well, that should fit, it's the right tension, that this one says 18 stitches, the makeup of the yarn can have a huge difference, can't it? Even as simple as woolen spun and worsted spun, don't you think?
Especially with cables, 100%. You really want those cables to pop. You need multiple plies, like a higher twist. That's really going to get you those popping cables. But you could also do something with like a mohair and like a... Well, I always get the two confused, but like the worsted spun and like a mohair, and you'd have less of an effect with that. And that's also fine. It's acceptable to knit a cable sweater like that, but you just have to know that you're not going to get as well of a defined cable because of that. Yeah. Same thing if you were to use a solid versus like a variegated. Like I probably would not use heavily variegated on that because it has such beautiful texture and you want the cables to shine. Yeah. And I think that the fabric color could take away from that. So these are all things that you need to think about when we're trying to select a yarn.
Absolutely. And that's where the gauge is so important. And think about it. This I don't know how, let's just go back to the question again. Reese was looking at 250 meters to 100 grams, and knowing all that cabling going on there, that's going to be 7 or 8 balls of those 100 grams he's buying. That's a big investment, isn't it? So that's when you probably do want to swatch, even though I know many of us don't want to swatch, but you do want to invest in that. We was talking earlier in question 1, weren't we? The process. Maybe enjoy this process more of investigating your yarn, knitting up the swatch, washing it and setting it, getting another yarn and looking at that swatch, and enjoy that process of looking at the swatches, standing back, or maybe sharing them with some friends and looking at them. That's where you could make this an exciting project, don't you think, Jimmy?
I mean, I think planning it is almost half the fun. Sometimes when I'm just bored, I'll swatch some stuff. I have enough leftovers in stash where I just grab some and make a swatch of a idea, or see how it reacts with, color work or cables or whatever technique that I want to use. And I think if you look at it as play and less about productivity, but more, knitting is knitting, and I'm enjoying trying to discover something new that's very, low stakes, then I think that it's great and it's part of the process.
Oh, love it. Let us know, Reese, how you get on. And you must go and just do a search for, how did you pronounce her name? I'm just going to go back to the question there. Megan, did you say Babin?
That's how I say it. It could be Babin. I've heard both, but
okay. But when I went to just check out what Reese was looking at, it is a stunning jumper. It looks, and then I saw loads of other patterns for men, and I was like, oh God, and the moody photography, it looked great. So let us know how you get on, Reese. And what you choose. I just had another thought. Brooklyn tweed might be. I don't sell Brooklyn tweed, but that's a good classic worsted, and might. I don't know which one of Brooklyn tweed, but I'm sure they've got one.
I think it's their shelter, maybe.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
That could be a good option.
It might, yes. Yeah, let us know how we get on and enjoy those cables, Reese. Okay, 20 minutes. We've got time for another question. We've got Camilla. Thank you, Camilla. Jimmy, this has come all the way from Poland. Don't you just love that? Mm-hmm. Question. I have a vest knitted out of... How do you say that, Jimmy?
I say Plutolopi, but I don't think that's how you pronounce it.
Tulopi. You don't pronounce the P or the L?
I don't know. I'm not Icelandic.
But basically, it's a very sticky yarn. I can imagine it being wonderful woolly. Back to the question. I am planning to steek it to fix some fit issues. Planning to do a crochet steek reinforcement, no sewing reinforcements. Can I use a superwash yarn to do the reinforcement? Or do I need to choose a non-superwash so that the reinforcement has a chance to felt a little with the main fabric? Thanks, Camilla. I'll hand that over to the knitting designer, I think, for that question.
Well, let's step back for everybody. There are a couple of things we need to go for. Plutolopi is an Icelandic wool that is unspun, so it's just the roving before you put a twist in it. And it's Icelandic wool, which is a primitive breed of sheep, and so it doesn't have that fine micron count, and it has some guard hairs. So it's a little rougher, I guess, than most people would want to say, but they have that, which is really good for like steeking and color work because it's toothy and it will stick to each other. And then steeking is where you cut into your knit, so you just take your scissors and chop and it is potentially terrifying.
I could say people are now going, you what?
Yeah, so terrifying. I have not done it. Have you done this before?
I have done it. Yeah, I've done it once, and actually, it didn't bother me because I could. When I was knitting it, I was doing a Rosso Cardinale one. Dario, who is a fabulous Italian. Hot Italian designer at that, and it was one of his cardigans. It was a top down. Was it top down? I think it was. Yes, it was top down cardigan, and it had this whole section down the middle where it doesn't matter about keeping the colour work going, but it had this colour work yoke where you had I think it was a purl and then 8 stitches of normal and then a purl. So you just basically had this whole sort of button band that you knew was going to be wasted. So when I did start to cut up that button band, I didn't panic because you've got a good 3 or 4 stitches either side that center cut. But I did do that, and I put a crochet chain stitch all the way down both sides to catch it, and then turned it into a facing. I did enjoy it. It was a lot of work. I enjoyed the process. It certainly made the garment of making a cardigan much quicker because you could do it top down and you didn't have to worry about doing a front left, front right and seaming. I don't know whether I would do it again, but that's partly because I've not seen a pattern I want to do again, but it was certainly fun to do. But
nice. So when you did a crochet steek, What did you use though? Did you use superwash yarn?
No, I just used the same yarn. It made sense to me to keep it all in, because also, if I was going to use a superwash yarn, it would just, yeah, absolutely, it would balloon. So definitely not, because superwash needs to be washed completely differently to a non-superwash, doesn't it?
Yes, it's important when you're doing a garment or something and you're mixing yarns that they could be different yarns, but they have the same wash instructions.
Yeah. And superwash, ideally, needs to be chucked in the tumble dryer, doesn't it? Because it's how it's made. It pulls it back in, doesn't it? It keeps its shape. And that's anyone out there. If your superwash cardigan is huge and you don't know why, then just chuck it in the tumble dryer for a bit after the wash, and it should just go back in place. But Camilla, yeah, I think you choose, you carry on using the same yarn, I would, and as it says there, it felts a little too, but yeah, I wouldn't use a non-superwash yarn.
Mm-hmm. And if you're concerned about it unraveling, then what you can do is you can felt it a little bit yourself, give it a little bit of that head start. It will felt with wear, but there is a way of securing that steek where you just take the, like a felting tool, like a little like sponge mat or whatever in the needles, and sort of like felt that steek a little bit so it doesn't unravel. So if you have really sticky yarn like a plutalope, then that's another technique to do it. So you can sort of belt and suspenders it a little bit, is just use the plutalope or maybe the latlope, which is also their spun version, which is the same colors. It's a little bit more solid than the roving, and you just felt it a little bit after you crochet. That thing should be fine.
Oh, and do you know what? I really like felting. I find that process very therapeutic. Getting that needle and stabbing away. If you've had a bad day, you could just, stab away on that. But you won't need to do much, will you? Because that yarn is very sticky anyway. So you don't want to make a mistake with that yarn, because trying to tink back with that, I bet you'll be pulling it and you'll feel it almost tear apart if you were to tink back, wouldn't you say? Even one row, it will already be embedded with each other, won't it?
Yeah, I think also because it's unspun, it's just a little bit less secure. Yeah. As you knit an unspun yarn, it puts some twist in it and it makes it stronger. But when you have to like rip that stuff out, sometimes it's best to just rip it out and then start, like spit felt it together and then like start again with the new part.
Yeah, I have to confess, with me at the shop, I'm not a roving fan. I did buy some for the shop because I was like, ooh, this is when I was first doing it. Oh, that looks nice. And it sat on the shelf for a very long while, keeping the shelf warm, because people didn't like it. And I understand why. Whether it's the feel of it, because unless it's merino roving, it can be a bit scratchy or a bit, uncomfortable, and maybe even knitting it not really a pleasant experience. But it doesn't necessarily give a good finish sometimes either, does it? Because of that, it's not worked. So therefore, it's like maybe looking through a lens with Vaseline on. It's a bit misty and a bit, I don't know, I can't explain it. Can you help me with that, Jimmy?
Yeah, the fibers are not necessarily like twisted, so you're seeing through them as opposed to like a rope, which is more. It's like dreadlocks versus. Not even dreadlocks, but yeah, it just sort of has like a pane of fiber as opposed to like a thing that's like twisted and put together.
It would be like my hair in the morning that's a big pile of frizz with no definition compared to a really slick deadlock, which when put together would look so cool, and you'd see that. And it goes back to what we were saying with Reese, doesn't it? For the cables, for it to pop, you want a really highly what's the word? those plies where you get the stitch definition. That's the word. There's not much stitch definition with roving.
There is not. No.
No. Well, there we are. 3 questions. Boom.
Great.
That's episode 1 in the can. It was all right, wasn't it?
I think it went well.
You're doing well. I hope I'm not too irritating. I hope you've enjoyed your walk or your drive to work. As I say, drop us some questions. Half-hour show, 3 or 4 questions. Well, we'll see how we do. It might even, if we have loads of questions, we might even knock these little shows out weekly. So you've got some new content fresh every week. And as I say, you can go to the description below, or anywhere. Might be on my Instagram feed, or as the weeks go on, we might be posting. Send us your questions. You might find that on Instagram. If you haven't already, take a follow of Jimmy, which is, you can see his username there, @JimmyDoesKnittingEverywhere. Yeah, Jimmy?
I believe so.
All right, and we'll see you for the next episode of Untangled. Cheers, everyone. Bye-bye. See ya.
Bye.